Have you ever thought about the hidden price tag on things? Like, what's the actual cost of air pollution? Or what's the value of your neighbor's amazing garden? Well, today, we're going to pull back the curtain on exactly that. We're diving deep into something called externalities. These are the economy's invisible side effects that, believe it or not, affect every single one of us every single day.
Okay, so picture this. Your neighbor is throwing a super loud party, and you can't sleep. Ugh. Or on the flip side, maybe there's a gorgeous public garden on your street that just makes you smile every time you walk by. So, what do a loud party, secondhand smoke, and a beautiful garden all have in common? You might not think of them this way, but they're all economic issues. They have real impacts that you just can't find on a price tag.
All right, here's how we're going to break it all down. First, we'll get a handle on this unseen price tag. Then, we'll look at why markets sometimes fail because of it. We'll check out the government's toolkit, see if we can solve it ourselves, and then, of course, we'll get to the bottom line. Let's jump in.
Okay, first things first. We've got to define exactly what we're talking about here. What is an externality?
So here's the official definition. An externality happens when someone's action affects a bystander's well-being, but, and this is the key, no compensation is paid for that effect. Think of it like a side effect. And because that side effect isn't priced into the transaction, it can lead to what economists call a market failure. Basically, the free market, on its own, isn't getting us the best possible result for society.
All right, so externalities basically come in two main flavors, negative and positive. A negative one is pretty straightforward. It's when the impact on the bystander is bad. The classic example is pollution from a factory. On the other hand, a positive externality is when the impact is beneficial. Think about getting a flu shot. You're not just protecting yourself, right? You're also making it less likely for your friends, family, and coworkers to get sick. That's a huge benefit to others, a positive spillover that you don't get paid for.
Okay, so we've got these side effects, these externalities. But why is that such a big deal for the economy? Well, that brings us right to our next section, why markets fail. And it all comes down to one simple idea. The price you see often isn't the true cost.
Let's take a look at a classic example to see how this works, a paper factory. Now, in a normal market, the factory figures out its costs. We call this the private cost, and buyers decide what the paper is worth to them, the private value. The market settles on a price and quantity where supply meets demand. Simple enough, right? But wait, what about all the pollution that factory is pumping into the air and water? That's a cost too, but it's not on the factory's balance sheet.
So to get the full picture, you have to look at all the costs. You've got the private cost, which is what the factory pays for labor, materials, and so on. That's what determines the supply curve. But then you have the external cost. That's the cost of the pollution to everyone else. When you add those two together, the private cost and the external cost, you get the true social cost. And that's the number the market usually misses.
And what's the result of ignoring that external cost? Well, the market ends up producing, say, 25 tons of paper. But if we were to account for the true social cost, the ideal amount, the efficient amount for all of society, would only be 20 tons. So the market is making too much paper. It's overproducing because it isn't being forced to pay the full bill for its pollution. That's a classic market failure.
Okay, now let's flip this whole thing on its head and look at a positive externality with our flu shot example. When you decide to get a flu shot, you're thinking about the benefit to you, not getting sick. That's a private benefit. But here's the thing, you're also creating a huge benefit for everyone around you. They're now less likely to get sick too. Your one decision has this positive ripple effect. But the market doesn't reward you for that extra benefit you're providing. So what happens here? The exact opposite of the pollution problem. The market ends up providing too few flu shots. Maybe the market outcome is 20 shots, but the social optimum, the number that would be best for society, is actually 25. The market is underproducing because all those amazing spillover benefits aren't being factored into the price. Once again, it's an inefficient outcome.
So let's just boil this down. The core problem is simple. With negative externalities, the market gives us more of something that is socially desirable. With positive externalities, the market gives us less than is socially desirable. The goal, from an economist's point of view, is to fix this. We want to internalize the externality. And that's just a fancy way of saying we need to tweak the incentives so that whoever is making the decision feels the true costs or benefits of their actions.
Which, of course, leads us to a big question. If the market is failing, what can we do about it? And that brings us to our third section, the government's toolkit. How can public solutions fix these externalities?
Generally, governments have two main ways to tackle this.
First, there's the command and control approach. This is direct regulation, like making a rule that says you cannot pollute more than this amount, period. But then there are market-based policies. These try to align private incentives with what's best for society. Think taxes on pollution or creating permits to pollute. Economists, for the most part, tend to prefer these market-based solutions because they can often achieve the same goal but at a lower cost to society.
One of the big tools in that market-based toolbox is something called a corrective tax, or sometimes a Pigovian tax. The idea is brilliant in its simplicity. You put a price on the right to pollute. It's a tax specifically designed to make the polluter, like our paper factory, account for the social costs they're creating. It forces them to internalize that externality we were just talking about.
But here's an even more clever solution: tradable pollution permits. Let's walk through this case study. So the goal is to reduce total pollution from 2 factories down to 140 tons. A simple regulation might say, okay, each of you has to cut 30 tons. The total cost to do that might be, say, $9,000. But what if one factory can reduce pollution way cheaper than the other? With tradable permits, the low-cost factory can cut more pollution and then sell its leftover permits to the high-cost factory. And get this, the result is the exact same amount of pollution reduction, but the total cost drops to $6,000. It's a win-win. We get a cleaner environment for less money.
So government solutions are great, but what if we don't need them? What if people could just sort these problems out on their own? That brings us to our next section, solving it ourselves, and a really powerful economic idea called the Coase theorem.
The Coase theorem is pretty mind-blowing. It basically says that if private parties can bargain over resources without any cost, they can solve the problem of externalities all by themselves. And here's the really wild part: it doesn't even matter who has the initial legal right to do something. They'll still reach the most efficient outcome.
Okay, that sounds abstract, so let's make it real. Imagine Tayo loves playing his piano. To him, that joy is worth $500. But his neighbor, Zara, can't stand it. For her, the noise is an $800 cost in lost peace and quiet. The efficient outcome here is for the piano to stop, right? The cost outweighs the benefit. So Zara can just go over and offer Tayo, say, $600 to stop playing. Tayo takes the deal, he's $100 better off, and Zara gets her quiet, which is worth more to her than the $600 she paid. Boom, problem solved, no government needed.
But what if we flip the numbers? Now let's say Tayo's benefit from playing is $800 and Zara's cost is only $500. Now the efficient outcome is for him to play. Even if Zara has the legal right to make him stop, Tayo can offer her $600 to let him keep playing. She'll take that deal in a heartbeat because $600 is way better than the $500 headache. So again, they reach the efficient outcome through bargaining, regardless of who had the rights to begin with.
Now, this all sounds great in theory, but in the real world, it can fall apart. Why? Well, first, there are transaction costs. It's not always free or easy to strike a deal. Second, people can just be stubborn and refuse to agree even if it's in their best interest. And third, you've got coordination problems. Imagine trying to get 1,000 town residents to collectively bargain with one factory. It's practically impossible. And that's why a lot of the time private solutions just aren't enough.
All right, we've covered a lot of ground. So let's bring it all home with our final section, the bottom line. What are the most important things you need to remember from all of this?
So let's put it all in a nutshell. First, externalities, both positive and negative, cause market outcomes to be inefficient. Second, governments can step in to fix this, using things like regulation or, more often, market-based policies like corrective taxes and tradable permits. Third, those market-based policies are often way more efficient at getting the job done. And finally, don't forget that sometimes private individuals can solve these problems all on their own, as long as they can bargain easily. You know, the coolest thing about understanding externalities is that once you get it, you start seeing them absolutely everywhere. So here's my challenge to you. As you go about the rest of your day, look around. What hidden costs or benefits did you just create for someone else? What unseen price tags did you encounter? It'll change the way you see the world.